My name is Ken Gosnell, and we are discussing today how to lead in difficult times, specifically developing a strategy for the next 14 days or next few weeks as it deals with the virus and how that's impacting our companies and our organizations. And today, our game plan is to really develop that strategy. We want to look at a step-by-step process of how do we encourage our team? How do we make the right decisions as a business? Because we're really in uncharted territory. But I do believe that there is wisdom and insights on the steps that we should take as we move forward as a leader. Um, the reality is for us as leaders is that we're only called to steward the decisions and choices that we have to make in that particular moment. And there are a couple principles that I like to remind business owners of, um, especially during these difficult times. I wrote a book that's entitled Well Done, and I talk about 12 biblical business principles that should shape our thinking as we grow our business with kingdom impact. And I don't want to spend the bulk of the time. I can talk through some of those strategies at a later point, but I do want to start off today by talking just about a couple of those principles that are going to guide our the foundation of how I put together some of the material for today. So one principle that I like to remind us as leaders is that we need to make the shift from ownership to stewardship. That, the Bible talks about a parable, what's called the parable of the talents. And in that parable, Jesus reminds us of three stewards that were to do efficient and effective work during, the master's being gone, the leader being gone. And there were two stewards that did well, two servants that did well, and one that did not. And the two that did well got to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And, at this point, it reminds us that we don't own anything. We may have a business that may be in our name, but it's our job just to steward it. And boy, stewardship right now is so critical for us as we think about the decisions and choices that we're making. We're making those decisions trying to think about the best interest of our business moving forward, our employees, our resources, our tools, everything that we have, but we don't really own them. We just steward them. And then there's another principle that I like to talk about that says that we did make decisions today that impact today and tomorrow. And Jesus made a statement in his life where he said, "What is the gain of the whole world? What is the gain of man or profit of man to gain the whole world and yet lose his soul?" And what Jesus was reminding us in that principle was the fact that there are decisions that we can make today that impact today, but they also impact years to come. They have an impact far into eternity. And so that's a good principle for us to remind ourselves. And that's really what we're doing today. We are limited in our resources. We're limited in our capabilities. We're limited in knowledge. We don't know what necessarily tomorrow holds. We don't know what's coming, but we can make decisions today, right now, the best decision that we can make that impact today and tomorrow. So here's what the roadmap for today. I do want this to be a time of interaction. I have left your speakers on and your ability to communicate with me as well. This is a team effort. We'll have people kind of jumping in and out depending on their availability for today. I do encourage you to stay with us for the entire day because I think are the time that we have together, which is really about 2.5 hours. We are really going to dive deep and talk about some real issues, some of the advice and counsel that I've been giving the CEOs and business owners that I've been working with. I tell people that I've been around for a little while, which is both positive and negative. I've been through the 2007-8 downturn. I've been around during 9/11, helped businesses during those difficult times. And so there's some similarities, but there's also some differences. This is very unique. But there are some things that I've learned from business owners and then even practice myself. But here's what I'd like to do over the next little bit of time that we have together is I always like to start off with looking at a biblical verse or a biblical idea that kind of lays the foundation of what we're going to be talking about for the next couple hours. And then I want us to really develop a strategy, a roadmap. So we're going to look at a step-by-step process of how to lead during these difficult times, both what you can do as a leader and then the decisions that you need to make as it relates to your company. I do want to have some interaction as we go through that process. So If you have a question, like I said, your speakers are on so that you can jump in and say something. We also have the chat box available so that if you'd like to say something via chat, just put something in the chat. You can send that privately to me, or you can make that available to the entire team. So today, real quick, as we lay this foundation, I want to go and look at a Bible example as just a place for us to start, because I think there's a lot of wisdom as it comes to examples that are in the Bible. And one of those examples that I think is appropriate for us at this moment is Acts, in the book of Acts, chapter 1. And the reason that I think this is appropriate is because if you remember what was taking place at that particular time, and what the disciples themselves were facing was that, they were in the midst of a very difficult time. Here, Jesus was their leader. He had been, crucified. He had been taken to the cross. They didn't know what was coming next. Everything that they had known for the past 3 years was all of a sudden changing. And so they were in the midst of this kind of turbulent time. Now, after a period of time, Jesus, 3 days, he rose from the grave, and then he was with them for about 40 days. But even that was a very awkward time for many of the disciples. They didn't really understand what was next. And then in Acts chapter 1, we get a glimpse of what happens after Jesus is taken to heaven through the ascension. So I want to turn our attention, starting in verse 12, Acts chapter 1, just kind of as laying the foundation for us this morning. And here's what it says. So after Jesus was ascended, that's what happens actually in verse 11. It says Jesus had been taken into heaven, and then he'll come back the same way that he had left. But look at verse 12. Then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day's walk from the city. And when they arrived, they went upstairs to a room where they were staying. And those that were present were Peter, John, James, and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James. And they all joined together constantly in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. And in those days, Peter stood up among the believers, a group numbering about 120, and said, "Brothers and sisters, the scripture has been fulfilled, in which the Holy Spirit spoke long ago through David concerning Judas, who served as a guide for those who arrested Jesus. He was one of our number and shared in our ministry. And with the payments he received for wickedness, Judas bought a field, and there he fell headlong. His body burst open, and all of his intestines spilled out. And everyone in Jerusalem heard about this, and so they called that field Akeldama, and that is the field of blood. First said Peter, "It is written in the book of Psalms, may his place be deserted, let no one dwell in it, and may another take the place of his leadership. Therefore, it is necessary to choose one of the men who have been with us the whole time that the Lord Jesus was living among us, beginning from John's baptism to the time when Jesus was taken up. For there must be one of us who witnessed with us his resurrection." And so they nominated 2 men, Joseph called Barsabas, and also known as Justus, and Matthias. And then they prayed, "Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which of these 2 you've chosen to take over the apostolic ministry when Judas left to go where he belongs." And then they cast lots, and the lot fell to Matthias. And so he was added to the 11 apostles. Now I recognize this is kind of a different story, but I think it's really profound and helpful for us this morning as we kind of lay the foundation. Because here, what happened was that Jesus was, or taken, the disciples were changing, and things were shifting. So I just want to call our attention to a couple things as we lay the foundation for today, because maybe the disciples were in the exact same kind of situation that we're in currently, that they didn't know what to do next. All of a sudden, things had changed. And so I think there's a roadmap here that they can follow, or we can follow, following their example of what they what they did. So first off, notice this. The first things that they did is, it says In verse 21, it said, or yeah, let's go back. Excuse me. Um, in verse 11, it tells us that the first thing that they did was they returned. Verse 12, the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called Mount of Olives. So they went back to work. That's the very first thing that they did. They understood that there was a time that was coming, that it was a time for them to get back to where they were going to go. They returned. And so the very first thing that we can begin to think about right now as we prepare for the future, making decisions, is whether it's a week, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's 4 weeks, whether it's 6 weeks, we need to think about what does it look like when we return back to full strength. I think that's an important concept to begin to vision cast and look like. What are the first actions that we're going to take when we return? That's what the disciples had thought about. They'd already, and we see that towards the end of these verses, that all of a sudden they knew that one of the very first things that they had to do was they had to replace Judas. That was a top priority. Now, they didn't do it before it was time. They did it when it was time. And so as you begin to strategize and think about, you might say, well, what are the first actions, the first steps that I need to do when I return, when things are back to normal, back in our society? Now, look at what he does, the second thing that they do. Now, it tells us here in verses 13 that they all went upstairs and they were all together. And what's interesting, and it lists the disciples specifically, and then it tells us that there was also 120 some people that were there with them. You know, it's a small business in some ways. 120 people gathering together. And it says that they all joined together and they were all unified as they began to pray. Now, what it says in verse 14, they all joined constantly in prayer, along with the women, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. And I love this mentality of the disciples being together in prayer. They were unified together. So I believe one of the roles of us as leaders at this particular moment is that we are to be praying for one another. We ought to be connecting to one another. We ought to be sharing with one another. We ought to be staying together as much as possible. And I think it's the leader's role right at this particular moment to, be shepherding our flock. And our flock can be our employees. They could be our team. They could be our customers. They could be vendors. We need to be consistently and systematically walking together to find out the needs of those that are around us. I think that lies great opportunities for us at this particular moment. So maybe our production may have stopped. All the things that we were typically doing may have stopped, but the ability to reach out and connect with someone, like I said, a list of vendors, a list of customers, a list of employees, a list of maybe businesses that are close to our businesses, maybe in the same neighborhood or the same block or the same community. All those things are opportunities for us to connect with people at this particular time that maybe we haven't ever had a chance to do in the past. And that can develop partnerships, it can develop relationships, simply because we're fulfilling the command of loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. So I think that's important. They were together. Now, I don't want to neglect, let's not go too far on this, but I don't want to neglect that they were joining together in prayer. So one of the persons that we need to be connected to at this particular moment, if we're specifically designed around faith, is we're to connect to God. God's going to give us wisdom. He's going to give us insight. We need to ask him for it, and he'll give us the design of the next steps as we move forward. So I think that that's important for us to recognize as well. Now, look at verse the third thing that Peter does here in this kind of upper room mentality is he recalls the promises of what's happened in the past. He knows that this is part of a plan. He says, hey, gets up and he starts to give an encouragement. He says, don't you understand that what Judas did was exactly what was been talked about in the past? So what Peter recognizes was that there is nothing that's happening in his current world that hasn't already been designed. It hasn't already been planned. So here's the point that I want us as faith leaders to take out of this particular point. Don't we recognize that whatever we face right now, whatever difficulty that we face, whatever hardship, whatever it seems is almost impossible for us to overcome, that Jesus himself has already planned it, that God has already planned it. This isn't a surprise to God. And so if he's planned it, if he has prepared for it, if he has known it was coming, then he also has a plan for us in the midst of it. That's one of the components that I love about this, is that if we can tie into what God has for us at this particular moment, then all of a sudden we can begin to see a new way of doing business, a new way to pivot at this particular moment, because we can begin to fulfill what God has planned for us. Now, let's finish this. And then the last thing that they did was they recognized the very first decision that they needed to make was a decision to replace Judas. They said, well, Judas is gone and we need the apostles because God has called us to go into all the world and to preach and to teach. And we know that we've got a mission to expand, a mission of expansion. And so we need the disciples at full capacity. And so we need, the very first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out who's going to replace Jesus. They knew their first step. And I think that this is really critical for us. So many of us don't think about what our first steps are. And we need to think about as we restart our business and we put back on this component of startup mode that most of us will be in as we go back to work in a few weeks, is what are those first steps? And I would give you just a few first steps to consider and to think about out of these verses. What's the first step that I'm going to do to serve my customers? That's a key component of what I need to do to, when we get back to work. How can I serve them? Is there a way that I can help them to come back and be back into our business? And how do I go a second mile, have a second step mentality to serving them? That's an important thing to consider. What's the first step that I need to do with my vendors? Have I stopped payments right at the moment? We'll talk about that from a planning perspective. And so how do I encourage them? How do I help them? What if I have a vendor that doesn't survive? What if I have this business? How do I look at that? How do I solve that? What are those first steps? And I need to start thinking about what is those first steps as it relates to all the partners that I work with, all the vendors that I work with. What are the first steps from an employee standpoint? How do I encourage my employees? What if I've laid off my employees? What's the first step that I need to do? When do I need to do that? What do I need to do during the layoffs to bring them back or to find a new employee at this particular time? How long do I go with less employees? I mean, all these are real critical questions for us to examine and to think about as potential first steps and first decisions that we need to make. But we need to strategize now about those first steps, that once the business starts, just like we did when we started our business years ago, we're in startup mode. So we need to think about what are those first steps for us as we move forward. So I love this model that we have here in Acts chapter 1, because it reminds us that God has given us a roadmap or a design that's through this particular moment, and that there is power for this specifically. Let me call your attention to one other thing. If you go back in chapter 1 and verse 8, Jesus says these things as he gives his last words to his disciples, and that's what enabled them to do this. He says in verse 7, let's start there. He said to them, "It's not for you to know the times or dates that the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all of Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." And in that he was taken up. And so there we see the model that Jesus gave them power to do exactly what he needed them to do, exactly when he needed them to do it. So they just needed to listen to the Holy Spirit as he was guiding through and directing them during this difficult time. So let's finish this kind of first phase of our kind of laying the foundation for a plan. Does anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts on, this step-by-step process that the disciples made as they had this shift and change in their ministry and in their business? They followed a step-by-step process. That's really what I'm showing us here in Acts chapter 1. That really laid the foundation for what was to come. But any thoughts or comments? I always love to get insights or feedback from people as we think about Acts chapter 1 as this step-by-step model. Who has a comment or thought? Did you see anything?
Jimmy, come on.
Did you see anything new or different? Did anybody Any new or different, anything stand out at you at this particular moment off of those verses? All right, a question I'm getting in the chat box um, is, you know, did the disciples understand the step-by-step process, or did they make it up, kind of as they went along? And that's a great question, right? I think that Jesus was preparing them, and I do think that he had spent some time. I think they did know that there was a couple steps in the process that I think were really clear to them. I think gathering together and going back to Jerusalem, I think, was a first part of the process, that they knew that they needed to be together, that was essential to the success of their ministry if it was going to continue on. They didn't scatter, they joined together, they were unified together. So they knew that the place that they were supposed to do that. And I do think that the disciples knew that they were supposed to replace Judas, that was an important step in the processes that they were to move forward. So I'm not sure they had the complete plan in place. I think that's some of what the Holy Spirit led in those different moments and at that different time. But I do think that they did have a couple of those pieces of place. And I remind leaders of that all the time. I say that it's important for us to make the first decision. The first decision is often leads us to the second decision and so on. So we ought to solve the first problem, right? The first problem sometimes helps us to solve future problems. And so we can't know all the problems we're going to face. We don't know all the decisions that we're going to face, but we can know a few of the decisions and a few of the problems. And if we solve what problems we know we need to solve, then sometimes that leads us to a bigger problem or leads us to a bigger solution that solves multiple problems. So that's why I talk about these first steps. Even in our times of downtime right at the moment, we ought to be thinking about what are those first decisions, those first choices, those first steps that we need to make in order to move forward, right? Is it a marketing aspect? Is it a I think hopefully a lot of businesses are looking at the financial situation and they're trying to figure out how do we mitigate that financial issues that we're facing at that particular moment. Those are first steps to consider. How do we maintain a smaller crew to move forward as we move forward? Those are first steps to consider. That's we're doing right at the particular moment. But those first decisions and those first steps are always important. All right, well, let's start down this pathway of a plan. So I want to give you a step-by-step plan today that I am encouraging business owners to really consider, to think about, to kind of navigate these difficult times. And I really do want to I do want you to put on your startup hat, because I think that one of the lessons that I have learned a long time ago is that every existing business should act as a startup, and every startup business should act as an existing business, right? There's lessons to it. Let me talk about the foundation piece here just for a second, right? So, Jesus tells another parable in the Bible that he calls the parable of the houses. And he says that there was two builders, and one builder built his house upon the rock, and another builder built his house upon the sand. And when the storms came, it tore down the house that was built on the sand, but the house that was built on the rock, it endured the storms. It lasted over and over and over again, so that it stood the test of time. Now, when I think about businesses, I think about that analogy of, are we building on the rock or are we building on the sand? Are we making decisions today only for today, or do we make decisions that are for today and tomorrow? You see, the builder that built his house upon the rock, he built his house in such a way that he knew that there were going to be some storms. He didn't build it while it was sunny. He built it thinking about the storms of life and how difficult it was going to be. And so he wanted that building to last. Now, I think it's imperative for us to look at different aspects of our business to see where we're potentially weak and where we're potentially strong. In a startup mode, you're often thinking about how your competitor is weak, and you want to build a business that can begin to take market share, and that can begin to take a slice of the market, so that you can begin, because you think you can do that better than a potential competitor, so that you can begin, or you can open up a new market so that you can begin to have some business sustainability to accomplish what your purpose is. So again, in that mindset, we want to think about not only where our competitors weak, but now we need to think about ourselves. Where are we weak? Where do we need to shore up our foundation to make sure that we're moving forward with a business that's sustainable? And so, I teach that there are 5 key components to every business. They've been around for generations, often taught in business school and so on and so forth. But it is important for us, as we look at the foundation of our business, to review each one of these areas to see if there's a pivot or a change that we need to make at the current time. So let me give you those 5 things, because here's step 1, I think is important for us. And what I would say is step 1 is to review and inspect the foundation of your business. Review and inspect the foundation of your business. And so there's 5 things that I want you to look at. Number 1 is what I call purpose. Why does my business exist? And is my purpose clear to my customer? I think that's important for us right now. What is the purpose of our business? Are we marching on the right order? Does it make sense to our customer? Does our customer understand what our purpose is all about? You see, if our purpose is clear, even in these midst of these difficult times, we can still march out our purpose, even if it isn't necessarily financially enabling us right now. So for example, at CEO Experience, we're here to serve CEOs to help them to hear the words, well done. So whether we do that in a retreat day, or whether we do that through a webinar, or whether we do that through a phone call, it doesn't really matter. We're still marching out the purpose. And so I'm more convinced today about our purpose than I was a week ago or 2 weeks ago because of this current crisis. I know that our purpose is strong. I know that our purpose is solid. I know that our purpose is real. And so what I'm encouraging every business owner to do right at this moment is, as they inspect that foundation, is to look at their purpose, to make sure that their purpose is right, and to make sure that their customers understand that this is the purpose of our business, and this is what will transcend those difficult moments that come in our business. Secondly, I think it's important for companies to look at people. No great leader ever led alone. And so right now is a time to inspect your people. Are the people committed to our purpose? Are we using their gifts and their talents and their abilities? Have we trained them in the right way? Have we educated them in the right way? Have we inspired them in the right way? Do we have the right benefits package? Do we have the right attraction tools to bring in the right talent? Who else do we need on our team? Just like Peter did with Judas, he says, hey, we would need somebody to replace him. That person's going to be really critical, important. They were inspecting their people right at that particular moment to see who was there and to make sure all of them were committed. That's what set them up for success. You see, when Peter pulls back in this particular moment in Acts chapter 1, it sets them up for Acts chapter 2. And we know what happens. Acts chapter 2, they preached on the day of Pentecost, and they go from 120 to 3,000 souls that were saved, right? Because they understood the people were really critical. They understood what they needed to do to make sure that people understood. So every one of those disciples that went out and preached, or apostles at that point in Acts chapter 2, they were able to preach and teach what Peter taught them in Acts chapter 1. Hey, everything that's happened has happened according to the law. Everything that's happened has happened from the past so that we can move forward. So now's a great time to give your people some assessments. It's a time to review everybody that's on your team with strengths and weaknesses. It's a time to train them. All those things are inspecting the foundation of your business so that you can make sure that you're moving in the right direction. Number 3, I like to think about in terms of products and services. Are my products and services built in the right way? Are they sustainable? And now people are looking at products and services. So Do I have the right product and service? Do I need to pivot? Do I need to add a product or service? Can I change some of my products and services? Can some of the changes that take place right at the moment, can they be sustainable as we move forward? All those things are important for us to look at from a business perspective where it comes to inspecting our product and service. What product do I wish I had right now? Might be a question that we can examine and to look at. The fourth area is what I call processes. Do I have the right processes in place? And so we've been tested on some of this, right? Do we have the right telework process in place? Do we have the right system in place? Do we have an online store, as an example? All those are key processes, and how we go about doing our business and how do we serve our businesses are really important. Um, uh, Thinking about processes, could we do it faster, quicker, better than our competitor? Because there are things in the processes that we've dragged out for too long, so we need to short circuit that process a little bit. Do we need to create a new process that now is a better way for us to do business? And those are parts of that inspection model that we use moving forward. And then the fifth area that I like to think about is profitability. And so as you start to inspect your business, I want you to think about, obviously the next few weeks are going to be very difficult. They're going to impact our profitability. What is our liquidity? What is our cash flow? How do we manage the next few weeks? I think the government is making some healthy decisions that's going to help us at this particular time. But what assets do I have? What can I slow down my payments? All these things, because we still want to stay as close to profitable as possible. And even with our teams, if some of you have teams, do I lay off my teams at this particular moment? And how do I stay as much profitable as possible? I would say to us, just from a couple of perspectives, and I'm not, I just think about it from a stewardship perspective more than anything else. But I do think about the term, we have to think about, right now is a period of pause. And so what I'm telling business owners to think about it is the same way that, I would look at it as, a fire happened to your business, or a tornado came in and just tore your business completely up. And you have to pause at this particular moment. Now, that means, can I still have some things that I'm shifting and sending out? Or, it depends. Every business is a little bit different, but the reality is you've got to slow down your operations. You've got to think about, just as a startup mode, how much runway do I have to invest? Is there other liquidity that I can tie into that can potentially help me to support my business and begin to market this business, so that I'm relaunching this business in 8 weeks from today, or 10 weeks, or 12 weeks from today, just like I did when I started up years ago. Now, there's going to be some money that's flowing out there. There's going to be money to your family and friends. You might want to tap into that as a startup fee, potentially, if they're willing to share that with you to help you sustain your business. There are some SBA loans that are going to be available. You might want to begin to check out those. You might want to talk to your lender at your bank. You might have to go into your own personal bank account and pull out some money from your IRA in order to survive. You can delay payments to your vendors. You can delay payments right now, or even cancel some things, because they're in the same situation that you're in. They understand that you're not doing business as normal. You do have to look at your payroll expenses if you got payroll. Maybe that's even, as a solopreneur or entrepreneur, you might need to pass on your own payroll for a period of time. So, that's the very first step that I encourage you to think about as it relates to thinking about, what do we need to do in order to shore up that foundation as we move forward. So the very first step that I think is really critical for us to lead during these difficult times is we need to review and inspect the foundation of our business so that we know what pivots and changes that we need to make. So let's talk about that just for a second. I'm going to take everybody off of mute and so that we can have a conversation. As you hear about this foundation, and you think about step one of kind of this parable of the the foundation of your business, I mean, what comes to mind? Have you already begun to do that? What worries and concerns do you have? Do you have enough information to make some of those decisions? What do you, what questions would you have about step one? Anyone?
Ken, good morning. I like what you're saying about, and for me, it really comes down to that messaging and how we're going to communicate with our customers and our prospects and our clients. And for me, it was really about getting ahead of it a little bit and just letting them know that, listen, I'm a small business owner. You're a business owner. Here's how we're going to move forward. We've delayed a couple things, and but we've been there to serve them as well. And for us, we really for that. And I think that when things do turn around and things start getting positive and, people get back outside and start spending some money, those folks are going to remember how you treated them during this time. So I think that's critical right now. And really, for me, at least, to get out ahead of it was kind of a big deal for me.
Right, right. Yeah, I do believe in proactive leadership rather than reactive leadership, right? So, what does that look like right now, and how do we get out ahead and make decisions? And that's part of that, here's the first steps that we need to take, right? That we're already thinking about step one, which is then lead us to step two or three or four. And, the worst possible case scenarios that we can make decisions that are based on that, right? And, treating people, that goes to that people model of inspecting the foundation, right? You want to be with your people as much as you can, with your customers and your vendors. You want to be constantly talking to them almost every day or every other day as you go through this process, because we don't know when it's going to break. We don't know what changes are going to have. We have a couple models from South Korea and China that people are watching. We hear news of a vaccine that's coming, potentially. And so, things can change and shift quite quickly at this particular moment. But the key for us is to really be thinking about, hey, what are those relationships that we need to be constantly in contact with? And how do we pay attention to those relationships so that at the right time we can get back to work and that we can begin to maintain those relationships and even expansion. I'm really encouraging businesses to think about expansion right now. I saw it back in 2007 and 2008. I saw it back in 2001. There were businesses that were retreated, and there were businesses that advanced. And what happened were the businesses that advanced were businesses that obviously they were using finances and resources and so on and so forth. But, you think about companies, they went out and especially some of the larger companies that I was working with at the time, but, they made a lot of big purchases back in 2001 and even 2008. They spent a lot of their reserves because things were cheap at that particular moment. And so they knew things were going to turn around, but they were putting a storehouse in place because they were, trying to play the market as much as possible, but buying it while it was low, thinking 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead, knowing that if they bought up enough, whatever that they needed, that there was a good probability that they were going to have to use that in the future. And most likely the price in the future was going to be more than what the current price was. So anyway, I think right now it's a relationship model, to your point. We want to shore up those relationships as much as possible. Now, one of the questions that I get asked, and I've been asked, and so I like to always have this question and answer period as well as we walk through this. They say, well, how much time should you give to that continuing in your business operations and planning and looking at those different moments? And I'd say this, as you think about right now, your business has come to a standstill in many ways. Business operations is not continuing as much as normal. Now, you want to continue your business as much as normal. If your business is remote and you can continue to do those things that you have done, then I would say press into that and continue to work as hard as you've worked in the past. But don't slow down your business just because other people are slowing down their business. You want to continue to make hay. I've got businesses right now that are going off the charts, right? Like the telemedicine businesses or organizations, health businesses are extremely busy. Even trucking businesses right now are moving, ventilators and doing a bunch of different things. So, I mean, those businesses are crazy busy at the moment, which is fantastic. Push into that. Hire people right now. I mean, do the things that you need to in order to be successful. Grocery stores are hiring people. Amazon's talking about hiring another 100,000 individuals to help during this time when shipping is such a big deal and people are home, and so on and so forth. So, if your business is in that mentality, then I say go for it. Go be as busy as you can. I've got other businesses that are close to 80 to 90%. They've lost their revenue. So in those situations, what I would say is pause as much as you can, stop your business, work with your landlord to, all these things are coming out. And the good news is here's the good news about this. Almost all the businesses are in the same situation. So it's not, not that you're different. It's not that people don't understand what's going on. Everybody's in the same boat that you're in. So what I would say is go have those conversations, go have those relationships with people, pause as much as you can from a financial standpoint so that you can have enough cash flow to see you through the next 4 to 8 weeks, the next a few different payrolls, specifically if you have a team on you. But then take that time that you would normally be at capacity and go invest that in your own business. And do step one, which is an inspection of your own business. It's an analysis of your own business, of looking out. Now let's move on to step number 2. So step number 1 is, kind of do that internal inspection. Step number 2 is do what I call an environmental scan. So the same thing that you would do with a startup, now you're beginning to do it, and you're beginning to look at the market. What is environmental scanning? It's a look at the landscape of the market, the world in which we live, so that we can know how to march forward in an effective way. That's what the disciples begin to do here in Acts chapter 1 and in Acts chapter 2. I think that it's a really powerful tool for us. They went back to Jerusalem. They inspected the foundation, if you will. In Acts chapter 2, they kind of launched out and they said, here's where the need is. And they started to preach and teach, which was on the day of Pentecost. And they started to talk about what Jesus was doing. And so after this session, I'm going to send you an executive guide. So every month that those that registered and attended this retreat, every month we prepare at CEO Experience what we call a CEO executive guide. And that's a journal that we give to our CEOs and business owners that talks about a business principle, and it applies it to a business application. And so we look at the different areas of our business, whether it's strategy and vision, or accounting and finance, or human resources, or sales and marketing, or customer experience, or operational excellence, or even personal leadership. We also do something on kingdom impact, which is how do we use our business in an effective way for God's kingdom, and also culture. But every month we're going to focus on one of those areas. And so one of the tools that I believe is important is a tool that I call environmental scanning. And there's some different models that are out there that you can use that I highlight in the executive guide, such as what's called a PESTEL model of environmental scanning. And it's to look at the political, you're to look at the environment, you're to look at social, what's happening from a social perspective, from a technology perspective. So those are good things. What I would encourage you to really think about is what I call the 4 S's, and from an environmental scan. So I would look at what shifts are taking place right now. What are the shifts that are happening that I need to pay attention to? So can I open some of my markets as an example, because more people are more acceptable to video conferencing, or maybe they're open to looking outside and being in a different way. They're looking at relationships differently before. So can I use some technology, some new technology, potentially to enhance my business programs and processes? But what shifts are taking place that are that are happening. I would also look at what I call starts. What starts are happening in the marketplace? What's happening that I'm starting to see that I need to maybe pivot my business around. So, and I want you to analyze that and begin to think about that environmental scan. What's starting today? Um, I think the whole relationship piece is really going to be starting. I think this whole dynamic of putting people down and quarantining them and all these different things that are happening is people are going to have a real drive for relationships. So customer service is going to be much more important. The friendliness of my business after it's over, because are people going to tolerate maybe this lack of customer service that has been going on in our society in the past when we've been not nice to each other or rude to each other, right? I mean, I'll give you one example of that. So this past week, I had a retreat day with some CEOs. I pulled together about 10 CEOs on early part of this week. And we were actually together, but we were shifting and because things were shifting and changing and happening really quickly. Well, I needed to run because we moved from our normal location, and I had to run into Panera to get some coffee and some Danishes. And this was, they still had it open. They didn't have the rooms open, the place to sit down, but you could go in and make a to-go order, or you could have a to-go order. And so, I mean, it was completely empty. There was nobody that was there. And yet they had about 10 workers that were in the back that had already been scheduled that I guess they just continued to have because they thought maybe that there would be a big rush that came in. Well, I walked in and I said, hey, I need a box of coffee that's going to serve about 10 people. And the little girl behind the stand, or the woman behind the stand, she was a younger woman, but she kind of looked at me like strange. She was like, why would anybody want 10 cups of coffee? And why are you even in here? And you're really kind of a bother. I'm talking to my friends. And we really didn't even expect anybody to get here. It wasn't, hey, it's so nice to see you. We're so glad you're here today. We're happy to serve you. I mean, here it was Panera that normally was probably making thousands in this one little location in their franchise. They were probably making thousands of dollars over the past few weeks, just normal way of doing business. And now significantly reduced their income. And here I was, one little person that was coming in to this particular moment and was some amount of revenue. I was buying a big order. I was buying a box of coffee to serve 10 people. I mean, that was a, $50 or $60 order. And yet this employee was having kind of the same attitude that she'd had the day before, the week before, the month before, that was like, hey, you're bothering me. Why are you even here? Don't you see I'm talking to my friends? Who are you? So then I said, well, I'd like this, yes, I'd like that. And she said, well, it's going to take about 20 minutes to do that because we weren't expecting anybody to come in and place such an order. Almost like, don't place the order. It's really okay. We don't expect you to wait 20 minutes. You need to go. And I'm like, no, I really need the coffee. So it's really okay. I go ahead. And so she didn't say, oh, okay, thank you. She didn't say, oh, wow, thank you. We're excited for you. I mean, there was no level of customer service. There was this. So my point is, from an environmental scanning perspective, we need to start paying attention to what that looks like, because the old norms that was acceptable before are not going to be acceptable going forward. So I like to think about, what starts are happening, and that means what is my customer going to start thinking about? What are they going to start valuing? What are they going to start paying attention to? These are all starts that are happening as I do this environmental scan. And then the fourth is what I call substitutes. So are there going to be more people or less people in my market? What are some other people that how do I position myself differently than those that are out there? What does it look like for us at this particular moment? So what is that? And how do I show myself as the authentic, real solution rather than a potential substitute solution? And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that right now. We're beginning to think about those substitutes. And then the last S, so that I like to think about is I call starts, substitutes, shifts and um, oh, shoot. the 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 changes. It's the changes that's in the marketplace that happen to us. And so I use the word spiritual a lot of the times, but it's a shift that's taking place, that's happening, that's new in people. So what's the difference that's going on in the people? The spiritual shifts that are happening with individuals. So is there a new perspective, a new feeling, a new opportunity for us that's out there in the marketplace because something is new that's happening inside of people that's different from before. And what I would say from us as a spiritual leaders, is that we're going to have more spiritual opportunity, a kingdom impact opportunity with people than we've ever had before. Right now is a time where people are paying attention to the spiritual leader. And so how do we begin to look for those opportunities so that we can seize those opportunities in a real way, both from a spiritual perspective and from a personal perspective. So step number one is, I say, inspect the foundation. Kind of go back to your beginnings. You could start your business all over again. What does that look like? Looking at those 5 areas of my business: purpose, people, products, processes, and profits. And then step 2 is complete what I call an environmental scan. Pay attention to what's out on the horizon, what's coming. We put that visionary mindset that's on. Start to dream a little bit so that you can think about the future and understand what's coming. I am going to be offering a session next week, next Wednesday, that is what I call a vision master plan. And it is normally a session I work with a group of CEOs and business owners on. And I have put together this master plan that really will help you dream and cast vision for the future. And again, it's going to be a 2.5-hour session. Normally we do it in person and we do it, walk through it together. But it's going to be an opportunity for you to spend a lot of time writing. It's going to be some time for you to think about what your vision is. And normally I charge $1,500 for that session. I'm giving it away right now to business owners for free. So I'll include a link in the email that I send after today's session, that if you'd like to sign up for that as well, you will get the Vision Master Plan as part of that retreat day as well, so that you can begin to write your own vision. And in that, that's a personal master plan, but it also ties to business. I have you think about what is your purpose, what is your vision. I have you look at a timeline of your life to see if there's pivots, things that you've learned. I have you think about kind of a personal vision strategy plan that you can also apply to your business, that you can begin to think about the things that are most important. And I have you dream a little bit, right? As leaders, usually we start with a dream. We have a destination that we're trying to accomplish. And we see the top of the mountain. That's the dream that we want to get to. And we start up the mountain a little way, and all of a sudden what happens is we get stuck on the mountain, and it's a better view than at the bottom. And so we're a little bit comfortable because we say, wow, that's a good view. But we forget that there's still a peak. We can't see it any longer because we're on the mountainside. We can't see what the vision was at the top. And so we often have a tendency to forget about it. So we need to step back so that we can see that bigger vision that we know that we've been called to complete. And sometimes being able to write that down and dream again is really critical to our success as we move forward. So environmental scanning, I think that's really critical for us to move forward. And I know, again, that's really a kind of a practical perspective, but I think it's critical. What I tell leaders all the time is, you've got to understand your vision. You got to know where you're going, right? Nobody gets in a car and drives any distance without first putting the coordinates in their GPS and knowing where they're going to go, or looking at a map to see where they'd like to go. We'd say it's silly. If we tried to drive any distance and didn't know exactly where we were going and which road to take, we would say it's completely silly to get in a car and drive that distance without first knowing where to go. And yet most of us live our lives that way, that we don't pause to think about where we're going to go in the future and how to get there in a practical way. So I don't think it means that we have to spend days and weeks and years on it. Sometimes we overdo the strategic planning part of our lives. Sometimes we do it, it becomes too complicated so that it's not workable. I believe in workable solutions. I like having that vision in mind, that clarity of where I'm going to go into the future. And I use that environmental scanning process in order to help me to do that, so that I can see where I need to put resources, where I need to put energy, where I need to put time, so that I can walk that out in a real practical, specific way. Who has a question on environmental scanning, or from a practical perspective of what does that look like, or how do you do that specifically right at the moment? Anybody have a question that they'd like to ask through the chat box, or even through you're unmuted so that you can talk at this particular moment about what is environmental scanning, or how do you start that, or any of those kinds of things? All right, a question I'm normally asked is, well, what is I'll give you a tool through that executive guide. I'll give you a tool to do that. I do what but you can do it relatively simply, is, I sit down with about 4 or 5 pages of a yellow pad, or just a regular, and on each yellow pad page, I list all the things that I think about as it relates to that area of the environmental scan. So, for example, if I'm thinking about shifts, what shifts are taking place? I want to just brainstorm. I just want to do a brain dump as much as I can to think about, here's the shifts that I'm seeing. And I set a time limit. So usually what I end up doing is taking about 20 minutes on each part of the environmental scan, and I'll set a clock on it, because there's a sense of urgency, right? And I need to start just thinking about, and I just start writing as much as I can. Here's a shift that I'm seeing. And I think about it in some terms. I try to focus my thinking as much as possible. So shifts from my customer experience, shifts for my employees, shifts in the world that I'm seeing, shifts in my community. And I just write down as much as I can on all those different areas. And when the 20 minutes is up, I stop. Now, if I'm really in a flow moment, I'm going to continue to write all those shifts that I'm seeing down. Sometimes, 20 minutes is enough time, because I only need to pay attention to 1 or 2 shifts in order to critically think about it well at that particular moment, right? So one of the software company that I'm working with right now is they have a system that helps people to do work better and faster. Well, they've never really thought about it as a telework solution, but that's a shift that they're seeing happen right in the marketplace right now. So they need to pay attention to that shift, right? So then I'll pay attention to starts, and I'll do the same thing. I'll set a timer for 20 minutes. I'll take a little break. I like to take a 5 to 10 minute break to get my mind to reset, because I'm still thinking about shifts and shifts and shifts. So now I need to pause for a minute, and then I come back and I take a 10-minute break, and I come back and I'll set the timer for 20 minutes, and I'll start thinking about all the things that I see starting that's happening. So again, I break it down into my customers, I break it down to my team, my employees. I think about it in my industry. I think about it in in the culture, things that are starting. I always try to think about those 4 levels. And I just start writing stuff down as much as possible. What's starting. And then again, I pause and take a break. Then I think about substitutes, and what are the potential substitutes to my product and service, and how do we differentiate ourselves from that? And I think about it from the customer's mindset, and I think about it from the employee mindset, and I think about it from a non-customer mindset, from a perspective of I'm out here, but I don't know anybody that's in this industry yet. And then I think about it from an industry perspective. And again, I'm just writing those things down, putting those down as much as possible. And so, I'm paying attention to each one of those areas, but that's how I do that environmental scan. But it does really give me some inspiration, because I can begin to see where I need to focus. And here's a lesson that I think is really critical for us. We need to pay attention to this, right? It's when the leader becomes clear, everything in the organization becomes clear. So clarity for me is really critical. I've got to understand where I'm going, what I'm about. How do I begin to do that in a right way, so that I can communicate, here's where we're going,
and I don't have 15 directions that I'm going in. I don't even have 5 directions that I'm going in. I have one direction that I'm going in, and then that direction helps me to move forward in an effective way, right? So that's one question on environmental scanning, and that's how I do that environmental scanning. Any other comments or questions on the environmental scan, or how to do that step 2? All right, step 3 that I think is really important for us, I think from a startup perspective, is we need test cases. We need some what I call small starts, right? And so you're even seeing that now in this virus thing that's being put out there, is that, you know, they're doing clinical trials. So they want to know if this is the area that they should focus on before they're doing it from a nationwide effort. And this is Startup Mode 101, right? This is what I call a pre-launch time. And so right now you have an opportunity to do some startup sessions. You have an opportunity to do some pre-launch moments, because you're going to be engaging with a smaller group of customers that might be interested in a new product or a new service that you're getting ready to offer. And so, and even as you launch out back, you know, 8 weeks from now, what I would encourage you to do is don't use this innovation time. This is real innovation time. Don't lose this opportunity. You're doing R&D right now in your company. You're beginning to think about business in a new way. You have the opportunity to develop a new product or a new service. And so this is an R&D time for you. And so if you can do it during this time, if you can bring some customers in under 10 or whatever the model might be for you, that you say, hey, I'm thinking about this new product or service that I'm getting ready to offer. Here's what this looks like. I think this is going to solve a problem in the marketplace. I'd like to give it to you. Maybe I'll defer payment if you would see this model as something that's successful or important for you, to a later date. But I want you to begin to do a few test cases on that particular new model of business for you. So again, it could be, I work with a wide variety of businesses. So that could be different for different businesses. It could be a new delivery model for them. It could be a brand new product or service that you're looking to, because you recognize that you're leveraged right at the moment, and the products and services that you have, if I would have had this product, I wouldn't necessarily be in the situation that I'm in. So it could be building a new product or service. It could be just a couple focus groups on right now that I'm pulling some customers together, that I'm saying, hey, I'm thinking about this new product. Would you give me an hour of your time? Maybe not this week because things are so busy and it's Friday, but maybe next week or the week after, if we stay in a downturn, could I get an hour or two of your time to talk through, here's a potential new product or service that I'm offering. And can we get together to have a conversation about it? People are going to be more than willing to want to be a participant of something along these lines. So use this as innovation time. Use this as opportunity time. Use this as creativity time that you need to be focused on in the marketplace, and begin some small test cases of what that bigger product or that might look like. Now, you may not be able to create something in 8 weeks or 4 weeks that, you know, it may just a seed that's being planted inside of you. But I believe that if you use this opportunity to work on those seeds, that you can begin to plant a harvest that might reap 60, 80, or 100-fold in the future. And I've seen this happen 100 times, 1,000 times in businesses, that some innovation or new product that they've been working on can all of a sudden pay dividends. One of the mistakes that most small business owners make is that we don't spend any time in innovation. We're so busy running the day-to-day operations of our organization that we don't have time to pause, even a percentage of our time, to focus on here's what new product or new service or new idea that we could potentially bring to market. And so I look at this as wonderful innovation time to do some practical test cases of a new product or a new service that you could bring to market. Further, let me illustrate this. I think maybe there's an existing product that you can enhance. So another innovation is not only creating a new product, but changing or innovating a product to make it look different than it was before. Maybe you can take two products and you can, or one product and you can divide it and make two products. You know, looking at the scalability of your organization, I think it's important for business owners to think about having people on all parts of the spectrum from a financial perspective. So can they buy something that is less expensive? Do I have a higher end product or service that I'm offering, right? Now here's the reality where it comes to sales. Those things that are less expensive are easier to sell. There's a lower buy-in. There's a lower obstacle to the sale. The things on the higher end sometimes create more, they create a longer sales process or a sales issue. And so, you know, thinking about my products and services, can I break those out in such a way so that I can begin to walk along, that I can begin an innovation component of all those different areas. And so, you know, don't look at this time as downtime. Look at it as innovation time. Look at it as an opportunity time to test case things in your business or in your particular products or services. I'm getting a couple questions in as it relates to that. Maybe you have a question on innovation and what does that look like? How much money should I spend on innovating at this particular point? Now, I would say cash is important. Liquidity is an essential part of the success of your business. I wouldn't, I want you to think ahead now. I think that we're going to go through a dip. I do think the economy is going to rebound. I do want you to prepare. I do think the next 8 to 10 weeks are going to be very difficult. I think things are still going to be slowed, and even after things are released a little bit, things are going to still be slow as we move the process forward. And so I do want you to have enough cash as it relates to that. But, and again, thinking in startup mode, maybe there's some bootstrapping things that you can do. Maybe there's some things that aren't costing you much money. So for example, surveys to your customers right now. You could go on SurveyMonkey, create a brand new survey, say, hey, I'm using this time to really make our products and services better, to meet the expectations of our customers who we value. Would you take these short surveys for me? And that doesn't cost any amount of money. Being on the phone and doing your own, if you're a small business, maybe reaching out to 10 or 15 or 20 of your customers just to check in on them, but also to ask them a couple critical questions about how we could improve our services or better once we're back up to full capacity, would go a long way in building the relationship, but also giving you insights that maybe you wouldn't have had time to have in the past. Maybe you can use some of your employees in that capacity where you had to shut down an operations, but they can go home and work from home, and they can still be calling the customer, talking to the customer, working with the customer, staying in contact with the customer. Maybe you have them on as part-time in order to do that, but that creates a level of sustainability during that period of time. That's important for you. So, you know, I wouldn't want you to spend all of your cash on it. I don't want you to innovate so that it destroys your capacity from a company perspective. But I do want you to think about a reasonable amount, and I think somewhere around I call it an innovation tithe, maybe 10% of your savings or 10% of your existing revenue could go towards innovating of a new product or a new service. If you're already in the midst of that, I would encourage you to continue to ramp that up as quick as possible at this particular moment as you move forward. So those are innovation times that you might have, and some innovation moments that you might have. Any other questions on innovation or step number 3 of you know, taking some small samples or some test cases to begin to improve your product or service? Jason, do you have any thoughts on, I mean, we were talking about that at our retreat day on Tuesday. Any thoughts on innovation or how companies can innovate during this time or?
Yeah, Ken, I think to your point, I think a great opportunity now that we are, slowing down a little bit, if that's in fact where your business is at this point, is like you mentioned, to really kind of take a look inside and almost do some self scouting. Like, what can we do more of? What can we do less of? What can we do better? And if you have a business that you need continuing education or you need some other, other learnings that are required, now is a great time to do that with your staff. If you don't have a business that requires extra education, now's a great time to do that with your staff. So I think there's a lot that we can get done now, even if we are, confined to our homes, or if we're, we're not allowed to be in our businesses or whatever it might be. I think you make a great point as far as, keeping relevant, staying ahead of the curve, keeping in contact with our clients and prospects and our customers. Because again, I think I mentioned before, they're going to remember how you made them feel during this time, and we're all feeling something. But to go out there and allow his light to shine through us and project that on the folks, we really can make a huge impact, not only on their business, but maybe on their life as well. And even just being encouraging and letting them know that, we're thinking about them, we're praying for them, and, kind of lifting them up. And, and selfishly too, it makes you feel good because you're not wallowing in, well, here's the latest on this, or here's the stock market's, all the news that's bad, go out and make your own news. And I think that's certainly a great message, and one that I'm really trying to project out there.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's really critical. We're going to talk about what does the leader do in just a second, but I think, to the point about training and, using that time right now, that's a pivot off of the innovation time. But it's still the same kind of a model that we've been talking about, is really trying to think about what does that look like for, improving. So really that whole idea of improvement at this point, right? That I'm thinking about, how do I improve myself? How do I improve the organization? How do I improve my products or services? And I think that's, really powerful for us as we consider that process moving forward of how do I make some of those self improvements, right? Now, the step 4 is, what I would say from a leadership perspective is that I would say it's really critical for us to make decisions well and begin the implementation piece of acting out of courage and boldness, not out of worry or fear. And so whether you're in startup mode, I mean, here's the point that I go back to, and I'm really using this kind of startup mode mentality, is that when you started out, I mean, you didn't know what the market was going to hold. You didn't know if your product or service was going to be effective. You didn't know whether anybody was going to, your business was going to be successful. But you had to believe that what I have is important in the marketplace. And so acting in that belief, you started to go and you started to talk to people about it. You started to put into place, whether it was the initial banker, whether it was a potential customer, whatever it was really starting to believe that was really, that I'm going to walk out, that I believe that I have something important. Now, maybe you developed a roadmap. Maybe there was a period of time that you said, hey, I'm in the startup phase, and then I'm going to look at this and examine and evaluate how long do I go with this potential area. But I think it's really critical that you begin to think about that from a startup perspective, that I have a belief that I believe I'm going to go out, I'm going to reset expectations from a budget perspective, from a financial perspective, but I'm going to march out of my belief that here's what's going to happen. And, I think it's okay to reset expectations. I think it's a little hard for us at times because we may have been functioning at a business at a certain level, but the reality is that we're back in startup mode. And we want to recast those expectations realistically that we say, okay, by the next 6 months or the next couple quarters, I want this. By the end of the year, I want this. Now, I believe in expansion. We're going to talk about this for a second, but if I go back into the startup mode of here's how I change my confidence and my belief that I'm back in that startup mode, then, you know, I can march out and whatever, if I get above and beyond what my expectations are, then I can celebrate. Fantastic. I did exactly what I was called to do. I did it in an effective and powerful way. If I'm below that, then I need to make some changes and I need to pull back in from a restriction perspective. But I need to lead with confidence, and I need to lead with clarity, and I need to lead with excellence, and I need to lead with execution. And so I think that focusing on here's my first steps in execution, first steps in startup, first steps in expansion, I think are really critical for us. And so let me just talk through that for just a second. I've got an article that's going to be coming out in Forbes magazine that is really about how to lead effectively in times, you know, times of worry and strife and difficulty. And I just want to give you a couple pieces out of that. I'll share that article when it's released. It should be in the next few days. But I talk about the importance of confidence. In times of difficulty, people are looking for leaders who had confidence. That is a startup model, a startup move. Steve Jobs had confidence in his Apple computer. He believed it was different. He believed that it was unique. He believed he was onto something that even wasn't necessarily a demand in the marketplace, but he had confidence that I believe that this is important. Walt Disney, when he created the theme park, had confidence, a belief that what he was doing for families was beneficial. He thought it was going to be beneficial for his company too, but he also believed that it was going to be beneficial for anybody that would come into the theme park, that they would enjoy his model of family entertainment. He had this level of confidence and belief. And so what I say to leaders at this point is just like we did when we were, should be part of our DNA. It should be part of who we are. It is to find those things that we're confident about, that we can talk about and that we can share in whatever environment, whatever economy, whatever going on in the marketplace. Because this is why we say this is what we're about, and this is why what our product and service can do that's different than what's out in the marketplace and how it's different for people. So find your level of confidence, find your level of belief, find that inside of you that allows you to really begin to speak with clarity into your customers' lives and into your employees' lives about why that you do, that it's important. Now, secondly, what I would say about this idea of execution, kind of first steps of a new business, is that your community or your communication is essential. Here's a reality from a business perspective, right? People can't buy a product or service that they don't know exist. So one of the things that you have to do is you have to figure out the communication streams to your customers. How do I talk to my customers? How do I reach them? How do I let them know that I exist at this particular moment? Whether it's through marketing services or whether it's through social media or whether it's through your website, those are really critical aspects of what your communication streams are. And I want you to think about as many communication streams as possible. People ask me today, one question that I often get is, well, what communication stream do I need to use in my business? And I say, well, I don't really know, yet which one I think we ought to have our favorite one. But, I grew up in the Midwest, and I mean, I'm sorry for kind of this model, but I think it's true. I grew up fishing a lot with my dad, and we would go out onto the lake, and depending on what kind of fish we would want to catch, we had different bait or lures that we would use. But let's just say we wanted to go bass fishing or something along those lines. My dad had a whole tackle box of lures that he used and that we used. So we both had our favorites. I mean, this was the favorite lure that we loved, and we would hook it onto our fishing pole and we'd throw it out into the water. But we also, sometimes we would use multiple fishing poles and we would use multiple different types of lures. And what I learned in that lesson from my father years and years and years ago was that if I want to catch a lot of fish, if I want to catch one fish, that's fine. I just use one fishing pole. If I want to catch a lot of fish, I need to use multiple fishing poles with multiple types of lures, and I need to change my lures frequently, or I need to change them consistently, because the fish might like different things at different times. And one of the problems that I see for a lot of businesses is that we don't have enough communication, what I call communication streams in the water. We don't have enough models of trying to communicate to our customer about what it is that we need at that particular moment. So whether it's social media strategy, whether it's a website strategy, whether it's a referral strategy, the more of those strategies that we can use, the more effective we're going to be at marketing our particular products and services. We try to practice that at CEO Experience. We want to have a communication strategy of social media. We believe that's important. Referrals are extremely important in the lifeblood of our business. We also have a website strategy where we have multiple websites that we can use from a communication strategy to pull people in to those different websites. We have an email marketing strategy where we try to communicate through email frequently and sharing information that's in the best interest. We have a market leader strategy where we're trying to communicate through articles that were written specifically to help business owners and CEOs. We have an ad placement strategy that we use with different ads that we put out, whether it's on a radio show or whether it's a golf course that we use. So we try to use as many streams of communication as possible because we believe that it's important to communicate to your customer that you exist and why you exist like you do. The third thing that I would say about executing this strategy, this first steps to our strategy, is staying close to your values, communicating who you are as a company and how you make decisions like that you make. There should be an order to your decision-making process. You should know with great clarity how you make decisions and why you make decisions. And I think that's really essential for every business to understand. And one of the mistakes that many leaders make is they don't have great clarity on how they make decisions in their business. And so people are sometimes left wondering, how did we come up with that decision and why did we come up with that decision? So understanding our values as an organization is extremely important. We put the CEO first. That's one of our key components of all the decisions that we make. We're always going to make decisions in light of considering other people more important than we consider ourselves. But that's our second value, quite honestly. Our top value at CEO Experience is that we believe the Bible gives us wisdom and insight. And so every decision that we're going to make is we're going to compare it to a biblical business principle to make sure that whether we should do that or not. So for example, to make a decision on Tuesday, as an example of whether we should meet together in person at the CEO retreat, because we could have done it virtually. Well, the first thing that I said was, well, what does the Bible say about it? The Bible says that we are to continue to meet, we're to encourage one another and support one another. And so I asked the question, how would our CEOs be most encouraged? Would they be encouraged by a video or would they be encouraged by a person? And I said, well, I think they'd be encouraged by a person. And then I said, secondly, let me consider the CEO in mind. Do we have anybody at risk? Can we practice social social distancing or space, sitting 6 feet apart? Would our CEOs be more comfortable getting together or would they be more comfortable virtually? And I said, I think my decision on it was I thought they'd be more encouraged to be together. And so I said, well, we'll make it happen. We'll be together no matter what. We're considering those things now going into April. We're making those decisions again along that same mindset. Now, as the first principle doesn't change, the second principle, what do my CEOs desire? That might have changed a little bit. Are they more right now wanting social distancing? Is there more anxiety? And they say, well, I'd much rather be online versus being in person. So we're trying to process those decisions as we move forward, but we're always going to make those decisions in that same direct order. And so it's good to communicate that to your customers. Here's how we make decisions. for the customer, with the customer in mind. And then the fourth action that we like to think about when we talk about is, can I make bold decisions? Can I make unique decisions that's different than other decisions that are being made in the marketplace? Because I believe those bold decisions are oftentimes what set leaders apart from non-leaders. Hey, Jason, do you have a comment or thought on leading with boldness or confidence, or how to gain confidence? I'd love to get your insights and thoughts on what does that look like from a business? Because you've been through some downturns as well. How do you regain your confidence after a time of difficulty? And how important is that from a leadership perspective? What do you think?
Yeah, Ken, I think for me, it's just really about being, kind of taking that emotion out of the conversation, kind of meeting them right where they're at, but allowing them to, express however they feel, but, just being that rock for them, and, listening to them, trying to help out in any way that you can. There's going to be some cases where you just can't as many concessions as somebody might need or desire, but at the same time, there's always something that we can do, I feel. And again, it's really, for me, a lot of those things around, whether it was 9/11 or the financial crisis, I was in the bank at all those. I was a commercial banker at all those times, and even Y2K, we flipped over to 2000. I was in the bank as well at that point. And again, there's just a lot of uncertainty. And just to kind of be that steadying force for them, just even whatever it might take, if it's just listening, if it's trying to answer some of their questions specific to whatever your expertise is, and just really just trying to be that calming voice and that calming presence for them, because there's enough turbulence going on all around them.
Right. Yeah, I think, one of the roles that we play as leaders is that confident voice. And I see that even with Jesus and his disciples. Jesus constantly reminded his disciples that, hey, I have a plan. I know where I'm going. Don't worry about tomorrow. I've got it taken care of. These different aspects of what he was trying to accomplish, because he was communicating his confidence in the plan that had been put forth. And so, as we develop these plans, as we move forward and think from a practical perspective, we're moving forward in boldness and confidence. Now, here's the reality. Some of us lose our leadership confidence. That happens from time to time. And right now is a time that maybe we've lost that confidence. And so, pausing for a moment to regain that confidence and that clarity, to make a bold and courageous decision. I often say that one bold and courageous decision leads to another bold and courageous decision. And that's why I teach in the book, Well Done, about the principle of believing in there's a principle that says, ask and believe in the impossible. Jesus taught his disciples that what was impossible with man is not impossible with God. And so the reality is that we can believe, we got to start looking at some of these beliefs that we have inside of ourselves as a leader. And what do we really believe that's going to happen? And that gives us that confidence to go out and start executing the plan that we've been beginning to put into place, making some of those bold decisions. I say that people can do the impossible when somebody believes that it's possible, right? And we've seen that happen over and over again in business, that somebody says, well, this is impossible at this point. But when somebody believes that it's possible, all of a sudden things begin to change. I'm challenging leaders, to think about, how do we grow our businesses? Now, maybe I think there are businesses that can grow right now. I really do. I think that we can begin to have relationships with people. We can expand the market. We can meet a need that hasn't been met, that there's an opportunity for expansion right now in the marketplace. And we're going to finish that with step 5. But I believe that there's an opportunity for expansion. I believe it. I think it's really critical for us. I think there's all kinds of opportunity. What I tell business owners right now is there's all kinds of opportunity to take market share, maybe not right at the moment, but in the next 6, 8, 12, 15 weeks out. That you can begin to call everybody in your industry. You can begin to call every organization. You can begin to make yourself available to every person and show them how you're different, because you're marching in the marketplace, and you are caring for people right at this particular moment. And so you're planting seeds today, thinking about the future. So there's all kinds of opportunity that, from that boldness and confidence perspective. A practical tool, one of the practical tools that I like to give business owners is a tool that I call the I believes. And, there's something about the power of belief in our life. And so often we don't think about what we really believe. We just kind of march through, and many companies understand the purpose of vision and values, but I think there's power in belief. The Bible talks a ton. Jesus was talking to his disciples. Do you really believe that I'm the Messiah? In fact, one of the most interesting interactions that Jesus had with his disciple Peter, he asked Peter, he says, who do the people say that I am? And Peter answers, and he said, well, some believe that you're Elijah, some believe you're John the Baptist, some believe that you're a teacher from the Old Testament that came back to life. And Jesus has asked Peter a very simple but profound question. He says, who do you believe that I am? What's your own personal belief? What do you really, really believe? And Peter responds, and he says, I believe that you are Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. And that is known as the Great Confession that Peter had. And Jesus responds, listen to this powerful. Jesus responds and says, Peter, because of your good confession, because of your good belief, he says, upon this statement, I will build my church. And he changes Peter's name to the Rock. The power of belief is significant for us as we move forward. What do you really believe? There's another story in the Bible that's actually one of my favorite New Testament stories. And it's a leadership story where we see a leader that came to Jesus, Jairus, that his a servant was sick. And he comes to Jesus and he asks Jesus to heal the servant. And Jesus starts to follow and go with Jairus, but he says no, because he's a leader of men. He says, no, if you just speak the words, I know my servant will be well. And Jesus says to that Roman leader at the time, he says, I've never seen such great belief that you've shown to this day. He understood the power of Jesus's words, and Jesus affirmed in him the power of belief. And so a tool that I would use and encourage you guys to think about, or the team to think about right now, is what do you really believe? And I would encourage you before the day is over to get just a piece of paper, sheet of paper. And, we used to teach our kids in school, they'd have to write the same sentence over and over and over and over again. But I would encourage you to write the start of the same sentence over and over all throughout that page. And it simply says, I really believe. And then you put ... And then the second line, you do the same thing. I really believe ... Third line, I really believe ... Fourth line, I really believe ... And I think there's power in that, man. When I do that exercise, when I sit down and look at what I really, really believe in, God all of a sudden reveals great truth to me. I mean, let me just give you a couple. I just did that not too long ago. Let me give you a couple of those. I really believe that God is sovereign and is not lacking supply to give to his children. I really believe that. I don't care what the economy says. I don't care what's happening in the marketplace. I don't care what's happening in my own business. I don't care what happens. I really believe that God is sovereign over all things, and he does not lack in his supply to give to his children. I believe that. Secondly, I mean, if I was going to write that list, I believe that God's promises are as true today as they were a week ago. I believe God's promises are true. I look at the promises of the Bible and I see that they're true. I really believe right now is a spiritual movement that's happening across the world, and there's all kinds of spiritual opportunities to seize. I really believe that. I really believe it. I really believe that God has given me this business, and that this business will succeed and thrive through difficult moments. I really believe that. It's not something that I have to question about. It's not something that, that I'm worried about. It's not something that comes into my mind. I look at that. I really, really believe it. I really believe right now that God will give me great people to walk alongside of in our teams, and that I'll be able to see the people with more clarity than I've ever been able to see before. I really believe that. I really deep down believe that in this moment, just as in Acts chapter 1, that the disciples will gather together in unity to accomplish a great purpose and a great cause. So I believe in that. I believe in boldness in times of timidity. I believe in it. I believe in acting in a bold way in times when other people are fearful. Daniel did it, and Samson did it, and Noah did it, and Abraham did it, and Joseph did it, and Moses did it. Can I do it now in this day and age? Can I act in boldness in such a way? I really believe that we need to shine our light in the dark places and in dark times. God's calling us to shine our light. That's why every day I'm on these seminars and webinars. Every day I'm trying to make more connections to more people. I'm wanting to shine my light because I believe that right now, in the midst of their fear and their worry and their concern, that I can give them hope and encouragement at this time. I really believe that. You don't have to question me on it. You don't have to challenge me. You don't have to ask me twice. These are the things that I really, really, really believe. And that believeness gives me courage, and that believeness gives me boldness, and that believeness gives me an ability to execute as I step out into the marketplace and do the things that he would have me do. So I want to take those small steps. I can't maybe move a mile or even move 100 miles. Maybe I can move an inch. But I want to act, and I want to act with intelligently, and I want to act with wisdom. Hey, let me do one more step with us, maybe two more steps real quick as we finish this up. I want to finish a little bit early today in our time together, but like I said, I will record this to move forward. So step number 5 is I think about new territory or new expansion opportunities that I have. And so as we think about a startup mode, back into the startup mode of what steps that we need to potentially take, is that I need to reallocate resources from one area to another. And so I begin to think about, are there areas for expansion? Are there areas for growth that I can implement? I see this in Acts chapter 1 and 2 as also. The disciples gathered together. They went back to the original city to start with, but they had a mentality of expansion. Jesus had given them the command in Matthew 28, you're going to go into all the world and preach. You're going to start in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, and you're going to go into the other parts of the world. And they begin to think about, how do we begin to move in the expansion types of ways, to move into different cities and different places that we've never gone before, so that we can expose our product, Jesus, in those new territories and those new lands. And so I want to begin to think about, as my area contracts, is there new areas of expansion that I want us to think about? Right now, we're beginning to begin to review that and to think about it. How do I begin to expand in my market areas? How do I begin to look at expansion? Well, one of the practical ways that I'm wanting people to think about is enhancing their sales team and their sales opportunity. There are some people that are paying attention to what's happening. And so, the more investment that you can make in not necessarily in closing the sale, but in the building the relationship of the sale, is going to pay dividends for you in the future. So expanding to new markets, launching new times to go into those markets, beginning to build relationships with those individuals. One of the things that I think is really critical is beginning to develop a list. I think all good sales come from a list. And so as I begin to look at this moment, I'm looking at potential referrals of people that I can begin to build their list on. I'm looking at what new lists can I build in particular cities that we're marching in, so that they can become more aware of our product or service. I'm thinking about if I'm in a geographic area, so some of the companies that I work with focus very much on local. So they look at a 60-mile radius or a 90-mile radius. And one of the things that I'm challenging them right now is to expand their market. Can they look out a little bit further? Can they go 120 miles or 150 miles? Is that a possibility from a delivery model and expansion? Are there new places that they could potentially acquire in those expanded markets as they look forward? I think the whole idea of acquiring right now is a good opportunity for businesses and business owners. And so now, again, maybe not acquiring right at this moment, but laying the strategy of beginning to look at that expansion model so that you begin to know that particular area that will lead to expansion. So I really look at this Acts 2 model and say, hey, where can I expand? What does that expansion look like, and how do I prepare for that expansion? Can I grow my territory at this particular moment? One practical way that I encourage you to do that is through the use of social media, growing your audience. I think every good leader needs to have a good audience. And we did a CEO Experience, did an executive guide on market leadership last fall. And we talked about the importance of growing your audience from a leader's perspective or from a company perspective. And one of the things that I would encourage you to focus your time on in this particular moment is that expansion model of how do I grow my audience so that I'm making a difference in the lives of those that's around me. So I think that's step number 5, is really beginning to think about expansion and launching out and focusing on sales. Hey, listen, I'm gonna tell you the truth. So I've been around during difficult times, like I said before. I remember what it was back in 2007, 2008. I remember even back in after 9/11 in 2001. And both of those times, I reminded sales teams and guys that I was coaching, men and women that I was coaching, that those were great sales opportunities. And we don't ever want to neglect the importance of focusing on those sales opportunities. Too many people don't think that they're an opportunity for sales, and they're wrong. It really comes down to an attitude. It comes down to, do I have a product that I believe in? Do I have a product and a service that I know that people can be helped by? And what do I need to say at this particular moment to begin to build that relationship so that I can gain a hearing for them so that they can make a decision on whether this product or service is good? But I've got to change that perspective inside of myself. I used to tell sales guys all the time that the first and most important sale that they were going to make is to themselves. You see, every day that they get up, they've got to decide whether they're going to go to work or whether they're going to go and play. Now, I mean, that's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward, but too many people, they act like they're going to work, but the reality is they're going to play. They're focused on other things. They're focused on themselves. They're focused on what they can do to pass the time, but they're not focused on what they can do to help their customer or sell their product. Now is a great opportunity for sales. Now is a great opportunity for building relationships. Now is a great opportunity to be out talking to people and listening to them and finding out what they're needing and building the relationship of trust so that at the right time and the right opportunity that you can come in with a solution that's going to meet their needs and that they're going to be happy with. Now is the time for building right relationships and not focusing on yourself, but focusing on the tasks that are important to build the relationships for the future. You see, it starts with that attitude of belief, but you got to believe that I can expand, not when everybody else is contracting. Great businesses acquire other businesses during downturns. They're expanding when other people are contracting. So what is your mentality? Do you have a mentality of expansion or do you have a mentality of retreat? Maybe there's another firm that you can reach out to at this particular moment and you can talk to them about a merger. Let's say, hey, can we do business together? Or maybe it's a strategic partnership. It's an expansion. You both have lost some customers, but together you can grow. You can expand a little bit. Maybe you can market that. So that expansion and sales model, I think, is really, really critical for you to think as you move forward. That's a practical step that I would take as I go. And then let me share with you number 6. So let me just review real quick where we've been. I say, hey, lay a foundation, inspect the foundation, make sure that it's there. Step number 2 is do an environmental scan. That's important as you look out into the marketplace that you want to, see where there's opportunities and pay attention to it. Environmental scanning is important. Number 3 is focus on R&D and innovation. Find that use this as test opportunities to try things that you wouldn't normally try before. Interview your customers, talk to them about what does that look like. Use your time for that innovation. Number 4 is I say do some small test cases. So do some small steps initially to test the market. And then number 5 is what I call expansion. Focus on the sales. Communicate frequently and often. Be confident as you walk into your sales. Know your beliefs. Know what you're trying to do. Stay consistent and persistent to that. And then I'm working that way. And then number 6 is I would say have the long view. So I teach that principle of making decisions today that impact today and tomorrow. I talk about the principle where we started today about the parable of the rock and the builder that built his house to stand. And I would say to you that the 6th step on this whole process is make decisions today with 5 years in mind. Don't make decisions today with just today in mind. Make decisions today with 5 years in mind. I think that's really critical for us as we go forward. That we become so often or so frequently making rash decisions based on what's happening in the moment. But when you have a longer view of the decisions that you're making today, now, are we guaranteed that we're going to be in existence 5 years from now? No, we're not. Nobody's guaranteed. The Bible says we don't know what tomorrow is going to be. It says don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow has enough worries of its own, right? And so I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm not worried about, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. But I want to make decisions with the long view in mind. Jesus was probably the best example of this. Even in his earthly ministry, which we get a window of for 3 years, that he was able to show us, he made decisions in thinking about 3 years ahead. Every decision that he made in his ministry was really pointing to the crucifixion and resurrection. He didn't get caught up in the moment of what decision do I need to make in this day. He made decisions with 3 years in mind. In the Bible, I talk about, or in my book, but it's referenced in the Bible, I talk about what I call 7-year projects. It took Solomon 7 years to build the temple in Jerusalem. That was a one building that he spent 7 years developing. That was after David had spent years preparing in order to build the temple. And I use that model to say, what are the 7-year projects that we're working on? Right now, I would encourage you to start thinking about a 7-year project. Start making decisions with 7 years in mind. What do I need to do today that I'm going to be reaping 7 years in the future? So have that long view as not you're making decisions in the moment. Sure, you've got to make decisions around cash flow, and you've got to make decisions around your people, and you've got to make decisions. I get all that. You do want to make those decisions, but don't forget your 7-year view. What decisions do I need to make today that really is casting the vision of where I want to be from 7 years from today? What is my temple? What building am I working on? What project am I working on that has that longer view that I can begin to work on today? And start that project. Now, it's a 7-year project. The temple wasn't built in a day, right? It took Solomon. And don't you think that it rained during those 7 years? I'm sure. Don't you think that he had difficulty during those 7 years? I'm absolutely sure. Don't you think he had people that wanted to quit and people that were frustrated during those 7 years? I'm absolutely sure he did. But yet he was persistent day in and day out. Every day they worked a little bit on the temple and they eventually got there. I love that story of the first explorer that went to Antarctica and reached the tip of it. Jim Collins referenced this in his book, Good to Great. And how he was different versus the other explorers is the other explorers, they tried to pack enough material and enough resources, but they figured that they could, when the days were good, they would go as hard as they could to get as far as they could. And then when days were bad, they'd hunker down and they wouldn't even move. And what ended up happening to all those other explorers is that they would get down there and they had more bad days than they expected, or just things that came out of nowhere. And every single one of those explorers never made it to the tip of Antarctica. They all died, or they all passed away, or they all ended up giving up. But there was one explorer that got down there and they said, hey, we're going to try something a little bit different. We don't know what the weather's going to hold, but we believe that every day, whether it's harsh weather or whether it's good weather, that we can go 20 miles, that we'll just go 20 miles. And we're going to pack enough material, we're going to pack enough resources that we know that here's how many 20-mile marches it's going to take for us to get to the tip of Antarctica. And that's how they prepared. And sure enough, they did. And they went down there, and sure enough, they had bad days. Some bad day right after another. But even on the bad days, whether it took them all day long, they marched for 20 miles and then they stopped. And then on the good days, they marched for 20 miles and it was easy for them. And they camped out early and they rested. And that was their model. And they were the first explorer team to reach the tip of Antarctica. They explored the whole continent because they had a systematic process and approach that made a difference. They had a longer view. They weren't thinking about just the moment. They were thinking about multiple moments throughout a period of time that helped them to reach their destination. You see, when we have that long view in our life, when we have that long perspective, then it helps us not get so caught up in the moment. We know what we're ultimately about. Right now, we're in the midst of a storm. It's a harsh one. It's difficult. It's not going to be easy. But I tell you that we can get to the end result. All we have to do is take a few steps every single day to work our plan, to fulfill our plan, so that we can accomplish the purpose that God has for us. Hey, let me show one other thing back to where I started. So a lot of these principles came out of Acts chapters 1 and 2 in the Bible as the foundation. I use it as a startup mode. I work with a lot of business owners in that startup mode. That usually that's on more of an individual coaching, executive coaching model, where it's one-on-one with the coach, and we sit down for 60 or 90 minutes together. If you want to find out more about that, we do have a sub-site. You can go to ceoexperience.com to find out more about our organization. But myceocoach.com is a sub-site that we have that speaks specifically about the one-on-one strategy sessions that we do with business owners. And a lot of those are startups that are really thinking through some of these critical decisions that they're trying to make. But, Peter had to lead a startup. It was a fast-growing startup. He came out of the midst of a difficulty, midst of a harsh reality, midst of a failure. I mean, all of these things that were going on in Peter's life that would have made him lose his confidence, but he didn't. He did exactly what God allowed. He allowed the Holy Spirit to come inside of him, and the Holy Spirit gave him power. But I want to read what happens in Acts chapter 2, just so that you can see what happens. And Peter gets up and preaches, and I want to start in verse 22 of Acts chapter 2. And this is what Peter says. He says, "Fellow Israelites, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. This man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of the wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep hold on him." Right? Impossible. I love that. "And David said about him, I saw the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, and I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest in hope, because you will not abandon me in the realm of the dead. You will not let the Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the paths of life, and you will fill me with your presence. Fellow Israelites, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried, and his tomb is still there to this day. But he was a prophet, and he knew that God had promised on his oath that he would place him and one of his descendants on his throne. Seeing what is to come, he spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, and he did not abandon to the realm of the dead, nor did his body see decay. For God raised this Jesus to life, and we were all witnesses of it. Exalted to the right hand of God, he received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and has poured out what you now see and hear. For David did not ascend to heaven, and yet he said, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand, and I will make your enemies a footstool to your feet. Therefore, all Israel, be assured of this. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. And when the people heard this, they were cut to the heart and said to Peter and the other apostles, brothers, what shall we do? And Peter replied, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And the promise is for you and for your children and all who are far off, for all whom the Lord, our God will call. And with many other words, he warned them and pleaded with them, save yourselves from this corrupt generation. And those who accepted his message were baptized were about 3,000, and then they added to their number daily. Now, I love Acts chapter 2 because we begin to see the startup take root. There was a belief, a confidence that Peter had, that he confidently believed the message that he was preaching and that he was teaching. And he communicated it outward. He wasn't just talking to the 120 that he currently had. He was talking to thousands that were there. And it tells us that at least 3,000 people were saved. Maybe it was more like 5 or 6,000. We don't know what percentage of people that Peter was preaching to, but he didn't hold back the message. He expanded out into the marketplace. He was willing to talk to thousands and thousands and thousands of people so that they might hear his message and become a Christian. See, he wasn't withdrawing, he was expanding. He was clear in his communication, and he had a long view of what was to come. He reminds them of this moment. They can save themselves. He's not just even talking about this day. He's talking about a day that's yet in the future, that each one of them will sometime have to stand before their maker, whether it's a year from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 20 years from now or 30 years from now. Peter had a long view of what was going to take place. And he said, hey, save yourselves, repent and be baptized, every one of you, for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. That's going to make a difference in the future. It'll make a difference right now, but it's going to make a difference in the future as well. So now is the time to make a systematic roadmap for your business. You're in startup zone. You're in the exact same place that the disciples were in Acts chapters 1 and 2. And we can follow their model of how to begin to build our businesses back. We can begin to set the standards if we just do a few simple things that are critical in the decisions that we're making as we go forward. And so I wanted to share real practical steps with real practical step-by-step process about how to lead in stressful times and how to make decisions over these next few weeks. Now, I have another few suggestions that I've made that can be found on another video that I did earlier this week. I believe in trying to do something different every single time that we speak and teach. And so I encourage you, if this was helpful to you as a strategy, as a plan, I want you to go back and I'll send a link to that video as well in an email that I'll send up following this evening with a few of the different resources that you have. But here's the point that I want to make to you. You know, it's messy right now. It's hard. It's difficult. We don't know what's coming next. We don't know what the next day looks like. And many of us are worried and concerned about the success of our business. And I would say, don't be. Some of our businesses might fail. It's okay. You know, we have some failures and setbacks in our life. If we do our diligence and do our best to lead in an effective way during difficult times, and we get to the end of our business and the end of ourselves and it didn't work, well, we can have confidence and boldness knowing that we did everything that we could, and yet it was beyond our control to stay in business. maybe there'll be another opportunity. I believe Ephesians 2:10, where it says that we are God's workmanship, that we've been created to do good works that God's prepared in advance. If this isn't the business for us, he'll have another. He'll have some place for us to go or something for us to do that is a part of the legacy of our life. It's part of the tapestry of our plan. So don't doubt it. Don't deny it. For many of us, this is going to be an opportunity for expansion, not for retreat. It's an opportunity to review maybe where we've been missing some things in our business so that we can shore up those things, so that we can build a foundation that can last 7 years or 70 years or to the fourth generation, to the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that. That God is planting in us a foundation of a legacy. He's planting in us a seed that is going to make a difference as we move forward into the marketplace. But follow his plan, not your own. Inspect the foundation. Build it on a solid foundation of values and principles in each of the components of our business. Look out. Open your eyes to see what's happening in the marketplace. Don't just think about old business models. Think about new business models as they are. Be creative and let God's Spirit speak to you and speak to you in a new and a fresh way. Develop new plans to solve old problems. Spend time in creativity and innovation and dreaming and vision casting so that you can create a new business model that serves customers' moving expectations, not tomorrow's expectations, not yesterday's expectations. Start small. Find some true believers that can join with you. Find your 120 that you can begin to talk to and recount the blessings, and you can ask for their insights and their inputs and their best ideas. Do some surveys with your customers. Talk to your vendors. Spend time building relationships about asking, how do I solve problems that you're facing right now? What product or solution could I give to you and to your company that's going to serve you in the long run? Then begin to communicate your message passionately and boldly. Don't preach a sermon to yourself. Get out into the crowds and begin to preach to thousands of people. Having that long view of the things that you believe in and communicate those beliefs to those customers. Here's what I believe at this particular moment. And share those beliefs with passion and enthusiasm. Remind yourself that every day is the day that the Lord has made. And we can rejoice in it. Find your win for that day and be passionate about it. And then have that long view that you're not only working for today, but you're working for the well done of the future. You're working to its finish. Get out of the today mindset and begin to think about 5 years from now and 7 years from now and 10 years from now and 20 years from now, and build your business in such a way that it's really about the future. It's not about the past. Now, I've given you some practical tools today. I've talked about the tool of what I call the foundational process of the 5 Ps. I've given you the tool of environmental scanning, and I'll be sending out an executive guide related to that whole concept just in itself. I've given you the tool of the I believes. And what do you really believe that you've written it down? I've given you a tool a little bit about the sales market of trying to figure out new sales and communication models. But if I can increase that or multiply that, I'll have more opportunity to build my list. And I've talked to you about market leadership and communicating in an effective way how to move forward. Now, I know that's a lot. We covered a lot of ground today. But I wanted to be practical to see and show you that you have some work that's yet ahead of you. So if you'd like any of those resources that I talked about, I'll share the environmental scanning with you. I'll share an article or two. But if you'd like more additional resources, let me know that as well. We do have a monthly executive guide that you can purchase and become a subscriber to receive that monthly guide to help you to think proactively rather than reactively in your business. That you can set a game plan on a monthly basis of here's the next step that I need to take in order to build my business to be a 100-year business. You see, it's not just about the little things that we do. It's really about implementing some of the bigger aspects so that we can move forward to building that robustness of a business that's prepared for the downturn, that excels in setbacks, and that really motivates because we have something bigger than just ourselves, that lasts long after we move on. Hey, I want to finish up. I know we do have a time, I do have a time for a few questions and answers. If anybody has any specific questions, I'd be happy to address that um, with just a minute or two, but I do want to finish because we've been on the call for quite a while today. And I know it's a long time to be in one place at one time. Who has a first question, or who has a question that they'd like to ask? Maybe specific to your industry or something specific to what you're dealing with right now in your own leadership. So a question that I get and I've gotten is, so what do I need to be doing today specifically related? I think right now you need to look at finances. I think that's the biggest part. And then you need to pivot to start really looking at that strategic plan. What is the next steps that I'm going to take? How do I organize it? What does my time look like? What does my team's time look like? How do we continue the operations as quickly and much as possible during this time? And then what decisions do I need to specifically make going forward? I would encourage you to pull in some advisors. I can help with that. Jason, if you're in Philadelphia, can help with that. We do have a team of chief experience officers. Our model is really to be here for Christian CEOs and business owners. So sometimes if you just need to bounce an idea off, we're happy to do that. We want to pray for companies as well, and I know that's Jason's heart as well. We have time for one more question. Who has the last question? All right, the question I got was, how do I stay positive and confident in these difficult times? That's a great question. I think that, it's a daily battle, right? Another session that we did earlier this week was looking in Matthew 6 about don't worry about tomorrow, right? And so for me, it's every day I wake up and I say, hey, this is the day the Lord has made, and I'll rejoice and be glad in it, and I can find things to rejoice about today. And I'm going to cast my cares onto God because God cares for me. I do have a tool that I use that's in the back of the executive guide that's called my win list. And that gives me focus. And it's kind of built in that way. It's built around Ephesians 3:20 and 21 that says God does more than we ask, dream, or imagine. And I have 8 quadrants that I look at in my life that I think are essential for us as leaders. Things like relationships and work and business, things like health and clarity and compass. So, I mean, these are some different areas that I think are really critical for me to know. And every month I'm writing one action that I want to take that's going to help me in that area during the month. And then I have another column that is about my dreams. So I have a big dream on each one of those key areas of my life that I'm thinking about. So for example, in business, my dream is to help 1 million CEOs hear the words, well done. So every month when I sit down and write that dream. I sit there and think about, here's the dream that God has for me. It's 1 million CEOs to hear the words, well done. Now, my practical step might be this, maybe I'm working with just one CEO in business that month that I really want to encourage and support, and I put that as my win list. But then my bigger vision is to help 1 million. I recognize that the one goes into 1 million. And then at the last column, I think about a prayer that I want to pray about that. And I want to ask God to enter into that. And so I might say, God, help me to help, person A recognize your goodness, or give me wisdom, insight, whatever it is that I'm asking God. And then I pray that prayer every single day of those 8 things that I'm asking God to intercede with me on. And it's just a recognition of the sovereignty and the supply of God, that it's not about me, but it's about God, that I'm a vessel, that God has me here today for a purpose and for a reason, and that I can cry out to him and turn to him during these difficult times. Hey, like I said, I'm here for you. You have my email address, my personal cell phone. My team is here for you as well. We're working together to support business owners during these critical times. I am having a special event on Sunday at 11 o'clock where it's a time of prayer and worship as well. So again, we have several events next week that we put together to really help and support business owners. And that's really what this is all about, is a time of support. And I would encourage you, if you have some moments at 11 o'clock on Sunday, to call in I'm going to be sharing my favorite Old Testament story that you probably have never heard about. It's one of my absolute favorite stories in the Bible. And so I'm going to be sharing that on Sunday. I almost guarantee you've never heard about it because it's one of those hidden, I call it one of those hidden stories in the Bible. So you can find that on Eventbrite. For Sunday, it's a prayer and devotional time. We have several prayer and devotional times next week, all for about an hour in length. We will be praying, and I do have a few moments that I'll be sharing. Each one of those are different and unique. If you need encouragement right now, this is one of the ways that I want to support you and help you during this time. Is schedule, hop into one of those meetings. If you can't be there, or sessions, if you can't be there the whole time, come in as long as you can. We want to support you. We want to encourage you. If I can pray specifically for you, or Jason or our team can do that, you let us know. We'll be praying specifically over those things that are going into your world as well. We'd like to help you through this difficult time. And let me pray this morning, and then we'll dismiss with our time. Father, we do come before you today. I thank you for this time, that we're able to systematically think about a roadmap of how to lead during this virus situation and the specific actions that I believe that you would have us to make over the next 40 days. Father, I'm really looking at this as a 40-day window, specifically thinking about what was happening here in Acts chapter 1 and 2, putting that startup mindset on today. Father, you are created our business for such a time as this. And so you're asking me to be back in startup mode, and you're asking every business that we had to be in startup mode. And Father, that's okay. We want to be there. There's lessons that we can learn from this time of startup. And so, Father, I thank you for those that registered for today, those that attended. I pray that today was a blessing, and maybe we can build a relationship with one of them, or two, or three, or whatever that you would see. Father, sustain them. Help us not to worry at such a time as this, but to cast our burdens and cares onto you because you care for us. So, Father, these are the things that we pray in Jesus' name.